Nice of you. Gets up early.
Just blood sugar, just maintaining workable levels of blood sugar. Thank you, Mark.
All right, welcome back to the second installment of the House Government Operations and Military Affairs Committee this morning. We are picking up our conversation on H270, and Cannabis Control Board Chair Pepper is here with us. So Pepper, thanks for joining us. I know we both face travel, childcare, the snowy Vermont morning issues this morning, so I appreciate you being here.
My pleasure. For the record, James Pepper, Chair of the Vermont Cannabis Control Board. And I apologize I wasn't here this morning, really. Our twin boys were upstairs running around and their childcare center. There was a wire down that caused the fire, and my wife actually had to pick them up in the woods yesterday because they wouldn't let anyone drive to the.
Oh my God.
Whoa.
Wow.
Okay.
Like next level.
Yeah. I was complaining about shoveling.
Well, so Bryn kind of filled me in on some of the testimony that everyone heard. I did catch kind of the second half of the morning session. And, I think she explained some of the rationale behind the new drafts, the amendments to the as introduced version. And I'm here to answer any lingering questions that the committee may have. I can talk about any aspect of the bill or address some of the testimony that you've heard this morning.
So I have a few things. So I'll maybe just that are in response to the testimony we heard. So I want to quickly say that we talked about huddling before we broke, and Representative Hooper had brought up some concern about going to the in-state background check systems. And it sounded like there's some openness if we can work with Ledge Council, maybe come back this afternoon with looking at if somebody can't demonstrate at least a year residency, that they would kind of default to the federal background check and fingerprinting. And if that would be okay with the CCP.
Yes, absolutely. We have 223 caregivers currently as of today, and they're currently subject to this fingerprint supported background check. We're trying to make it easier for them because, again, the vast majority of these people are children that are growing for their parents or picking up from a medical dispensary. There's one location in the state that allows to get electronic fingerprint supported background checks that have a very quick turnaround. Everyone else has to kind of go through a little bit more onerous of a process. Just again, given the kind of authorization that they actually have, it seems a little bit unnecessary. We want these caregivers to be able to provide for these ailing people, but it's a very legitimate concern that we also are kind of granting them a license to operate in a way. And, almost all regulated professions have some kind of background check procedure. So I think this is a nice balance to kind of people that we don't know, people that haven't a long history in Vermont. Maybe we do the 50 state, people that have a long history in Vermont. We do the Vermont background check and check the two registries.
Representative Hooper, of course.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Mr. Pepper for that consideration.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we'll pick that back up when we have some language to look at, but any lingering questions about the caregiver background check changes? Okay, we'll circle back to that once we have a little bit of new language. The next thing I had on my list from this morning was the question about with a propagation cultivator license. It sounded like the 2,500 square feet was the number that was proposed by the Cannabis Control Board. Heard a rep from pretty large licensee currently that they'd like to have additional canopy. Is there a specific sort of reason for 2,500, or was it the desire to just not have kind of infinite clones be able to be?
Yes, I mean, 2,500 square feet, by way of context, would be a tier 2 cultivator in Vermont. most states have an uncapped nursery license. The thought is if you specialize in clones, we want a clean source material for this industry. And if someone's going to specialize in this aspect of it, why cap them? And so we actually proposed last year a nursery license, propagation license, they're synonyms. It did not have a cap, and there was some concern that, we might see a massive operation that just specializes in this. And, I think that the board heard that concern and is now coming back saying 2,500. Is that the right number? I mean, essentially these people are going to be supplying the entire industry. And so 2,500 means that there's going to have to be many of them to get to kind of supply the entire industry. And so, it's really just a policy decision. There wasn't much of a rationale behind the cannabis board's 2,500. We heard the concern from the legislature and didn't want to make it unlimited or uncapped.
So I appreciate your willingness to kind of jump all over the place based on things we heard this morning. So there's flexibility for the number of caregivers right now, or discretion that we're putting in the bill for the number of caregivers for a patient who is 18 years or younger, as I read it, right? Is there any reason not to give the Cannabis Control Board that discretion for other patients?
I think you heard probably from Jessie Lynn today, because she certainly has kind of articulated her concerns with the board that, some people need around the clock coverage 24/7. And to limit the number of caregivers, without any sort of discretion for the board or someone's particular circumstances, has led to just people having to operate illicitly, people having to kind of break the law around caregiving. And it's, I think you heard it even from Eric St. Croix. He, because both mother and father were separated, living in different parts of the state, both needed to administer the medicine, and neither of them knew how to cultivate. And so they had to engage with a third party. He was operating illegally. It's a position that people don't like to be in, but they're going to do what's necessary. I would like that discretion, but again, I can't speak to future cannabis boards. I'm not going to be in this job forever. I would like to be able to, listen to a person's circumstances and determine what the appropriate number of caregivers are. But it's a trust exercise between the cannabis board and the legislature. Historically, it's always been 1-to-1, one patient, one caregiver. Because of this story, actually, they changed it for people under 18 to 2. Even in that situation, it wasn't enough.
So my next question comes out of Mr. Lucas's testimony, which has to do with this ambiguity around current folks who have a cultivation license. Mm-hmm. Is it the board's position that they're allowed to sell seeds and starts sort of currently off their, but my understanding is they can only sell to other licensees, but it sounded like there's some sort of ambiguity or question about that. So I was wondering if you heard his comments and could maybe respond or clear that up.
I walked in halfway through. We have the position that cultivators can sell to other licensees, not to the general public. This has been complicated by the DEA. There's a law firm that really pushed the DEA on whether seeds, specifically seeds, should be considered for the purposes of the Controlled Substance Act. And there's a DEA determination letter, it's called, that says seeds are hemp. So they're not a Schedule I substance. Tomato seed and a cannabis seed shall be treated equally in the eyes of the law. And so we can't really stop a cultivator from selling a seed. when it comes to clones, I do not believe that there's the same determination from, although the same law firm and others advocates are trying to get the DEA to kind of make a ruling on clones. So what we've said is, clones can be sold within the supply chain, but they can only be sold to the general public through retailers. If they were to be sold by cultivators, I just would caution that we have about 250 cultivators in the state. This would be people coming onto the cultivation farms to purchase them or coming to a farm stand to purchase them. We have very strict controls over our retail licensees, including point of sale systems, inventory tracking, age verification, advertising, and it could potentially create a resource issue at the board if all of a sudden we had 250 retail locations for clones. So it's just a concern that the board has with kind of opening the door at this point to what would essentially be kind of farm gate sales.
Yeah, I have heard significant, we heard testimony from the Growers Association, Mr. Lucas today, a real desire for there to be able to be sale from licensed cultivators to the public on farm. I think that is a question that deserves some more discussion. I don't think we're going to be able to resolve it in the context of the bill, because I know there are significant concerns. You bring up just some of them, but this question of how we define cannabis, especially either before or if the plant's ever going to have enough THC to be intoxicating in any way, is a question that I think we're going to continue to wrestle with as we deal with these policies over the years. But I think we're not going to address that in each 270.
Yeah, I mean, the idea that we've been just trying to put some structure to is maybe having a limited set of over 21 farmers markets, a limited, maybe a pilot program where we would allow just a farmers market that could take place in a place that's not visible to the general public, could have a number of stands of cultivators that would allow this kind of direct to market access, which the cultivators desperately need, if they're going to be successful. To allow people onto the farm at this point would just, I think, require more staffing at the board level, just to make sure that some of the same protections that we have on the retail stores could apply here. And again, this is a very high value crop at a specific time of year. It's also a largely cash industry. And so, trying to balance all of these public safety and consumer safety concerns is challenging. And it just takes, some thoughtfulness and some resources behind it to make sure it's working well.
All right, I've dominated the chair's time here. Other questions for Chair Pepper?
Is this on anything in the bill?
Yeah, we're wide open. Pepper is I think he's pretty familiar with everything that's in the bill, so I'm willing to let it be a little free ranging if you want to go first.
Yeah, sure. Again, I apologize for being late this morning. So the question I've got, and I've received a number of emails from doctors as well as just, I guess, individuals that are following this bill. And one of the concerns that they have, a big concern, is that the additional qualifying medical conditions. And I'm just curious as to where these all originated from and whether there's any actual background of harm that could be attributed to adding these. Who initially crafted these additional qualifying conditions?
So the ones that are in current law, I think there's some board, I think, that creates them. I think the medical society could explain that a little bit better. But I sit on this Cannabis Regulators Association. We don't take any industry money. It is literally just people around the country that are, on cannabis boards, and their supporting staff that are kind of talking about emerging issues. I sit on the medical marijuana or medical cannabis subcommittee. You know, I have real concerns that the medical program is kind of heading in a direction that might not be sustainable. And so the chair of that committee is the chair of the Medical Cannabis Board for Minnesota. And I just asked, how do you go about adding qualifying conditions to your program? Because some people have anxiety, some people have, if you're going to prescribe, I think Pennsylvania, a number of states have, you're going to prescribe an opiate, then you can also prescribe a medical card, or you automatically get access to a medical card. Some people have acute pain. Some people have whatever a doctor thinks is appropriate. There's a wide array of qualifying conditions out there. So Minnesota, they have a petition-based process. I should say their medical program is housed within the Department of Health. They have a petition-based process. So when once a condition like multiple sclerosis or something like that gets 500 signatures, some number of signatures, then it triggers a review by a medical research team at the Department of Health. And they look at all of the kind of preclinical studies, the clinical studies, the observational studies that have been conducted in the United States, and those are usually pretty limited, but also internationally. And they kind of break down the components of what the kind of symptoms of the condition are, and they look for, has cannabis been effective treatment for any of those conditions? And then they make a recommendation back to the Medical Cannabis Board and the Commissioner of Health. And then they vote on whether or not they should include it. And they've denied things like anxiety in the past. They've denied a lot of conditions. But the conditions that I was requesting in this bill would square our list with Minnesota. I mean, I don't presume that I don't think we have the resources to kind of do what Minnesota does. Certainly not kind of at our Department of Health. But I thought that we could just piggyback off of what they've done. And I've submitted all of the white papers that they've produced, Minnesota has produced for all of these conditions. They were under my name the last time I testified. I think it was 2 weeks ago. That being said, the research is limited. It is very limited. And I know that the Department of Health got these white papers yesterday, and they didn't have a chance to review them in time for the hearing that we had in Human Services yesterday. So,
Okay, thanks for that.
Senator?
Chair Pepper, you just mentioned something that I didn't know existed, the National Cannabis Control Board,
yeah,
like
regular
a AAA. Still federally frowned upon. Is anybody reporting that the feds have stuck their nose in a little bit and said, hey, what are you doing? Or you're pushing this too far? And if they did, where would they come?
Well, it's very complicated history with the federal government. I could review some of my notes from.
That's okay.
No,
We can talk.
I'd say the Cole Memoranda, which kind of blessed states moving to legalize adult use cannabis, was drafted and released, and it's just guidance. It's not it's just policy. It can be overturned, and it has been overturned. It was released in 2013, and that kind of allowed states to proceed with adult use medical. Colorado was the first, and Washington, Oregon followed very closely behind, Alaska as well. When Attorney General Jeff Sessions rescinded that memo in 2018, and so everyone kind of didn't know what to do. Are these kind of DEA raids going to resume? That didn't happen. It was a $30 billion industry. Like, it's kind of hard to put the brakes on it just overnight. There's been some movement federally. Last year, President Biden signed the first standalone cannabis piece of legislation that passed. It was pretty narrow in its scope. It was allowed for greater access to research licenses for federally backed institutions that has some research cannabis. President Biden pardoned simple possession for people with federal charges. There's talk of this in this regulators association that there's going to be a new coal memoranda coming out soon, because it sounds to me like safe banking probably isn't going to pass this year. And so we need a kind of new baseline that gives credit unions, especially what they need, the kind of roadmap to banking cannabis funds if safe banking isn't going to pass.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for Chair Pepper at this point? So I have had a request for us to have the Vermont Medical Society's representative has asked me to invite a doctor from Colorado in to testify. So I'm wondering maybe if Chair Pepper, you'd be willing to stick around while we hear I think it's Dr. Stout's testimony regarding H270. Then we'll kind of pick this back up before we break for lunch a few minutes early, because I know a number of us are attending the early childhood day lunch. And my plan would be, assuming that 4 is not super long, for us to come back and hopefully look at a draft that incorporates some of the feedback that we've heard this morning, tries to address Representative Hooper's idea about the caregiver residency, kind of having another pathway there, and then a couple of the other more minor changes, I think. So Chair Pepper, still hang tight. That would be great. And I'll invite Dr. Stout to join us on Zoom here. Welcome to the House Committee on Gov.Ops and Military Affairs.
Good morning. Thank you very much. I really appreciate being allowed to give some testimony. I am Libby Stout. I am a board certified. I'm sorry, my internet is not the best, so I might have to stop my video, but I am a board certified addiction psychiatrist in Colorado, and I have given talks and I've testified in Vermont before, mainly on several occasions, just to help people understand the significant consequences we've seen in Colorado from our fairly unregulated market. And looking at your H270 bill, I have some very serious concerns that some of the things in that bill are going to significantly increase your public health harms. And I just think it's really important to recognize that. First of all, I would speak to the issue about the post-traumatic stress disorder situation. Post-traumatic stress disorder is a very treatable illness or disorder, extremely treatable. There has not been a single study that is well-designed, well-represented, demonstrating that cannabis helps PTSD or resolves PTSD or treats PTSD. In fact, most of the studies have shown definitively that it makes people worse. There was a brand new study just recently published on data from the National Health and Resilience Study in veterans between 2019 and 2020, and looking at over 4,000 veterans. And they found basically that frequent cannabis use actually worsens PTSD symptoms. Other studies have shown that, yes, it definitely makes people worse. Some studies have shown that, yes, temporarily it works in the fact that, yes, it numbs people and it can take away the symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder when it's used acutely. But that requires somebody to use it regularly on a regular basis, like daily, sometimes multiple times a day, then that sets them up for cannabis use disorder, psychotic symptoms, cannabis hyperemesis syndrome. And so this is why this has not been really beneficial. There actually was this review article that looked at all of the peer-reviewed studies and randomized controlled trials in humans from 1974 to 2020. And they found that while low dose of THC, and their low dose was 7.5 milligrams, that could potentiate fear memory extinction. And so it then could decrease anxiety in people with PTSD without any psychotic effects. However, they found that when they got into stuff that was greater than 10% or greater than 10 milligrams, that did not facilitate fear memory extinction, and it increased anxiety and increased psychotic symptoms. So that then speaks to your idea about expanding the amount of THC available in a package. And that, I mean, I have been so happy with Vermont to date because they're like the first state to actually put some stricter regulations on these things and have a potency cap. And
So
I
Dr.
think
Stout, I just want to be really clear, and I've been doing this in all of our previous testimony. When anyone talks about potency, I just want to be very clear for the committee because it's easy, because that's being discussed elsewhere in the building, to get confused. And we have a lot of new folks to this on our committee. There is no change in H270 about potency limits or serving size limits. The one change we're talking about that you did reference, and I appreciate your caution and concern on, is the amount of servings we're allowing, or the total amount of THC that we're allowing in a container, potentially going from 50 milligrams to 100 milligrams. But I just want to be super clear for the committee, just that they understand your testimony, that we're not talking about changing the potency of any of those approved products today.
Okay, and I appreciate that. I understand that. So basically, it's expanding the amount that's available in a package. And that is concerning in the fact that the more somebody uses, the more problematic it's going to be. And we've had these significant increases nationwide in young children getting hold of these things. Even in places like Canada, where they have really good packaging, and it's supposed to be not available to the kids, they've had like an 800% increase in kids in the emergency room having to be admitted to hospitals. And so the less amount that's in a package, the better in these regards. There's also studies now showing that there's this almost a 2,000% increase in older people ending up in emergency rooms or hospitalizations because of the high doses of THC that people are using. And I just saw a webinar on somebody who is a cannabis researcher and treats people with cannabis. And she was even saying that what they need is the low dose THC, not these high dose products. And so a biggest, concern I would have for your population is you already have this huge use of THC by those 18 to 24, where their brains are still developing, and they have this really significant impact that I don't think they're aware of, because the publicity has been, oh, this is great, this is safe, this is good for you, there's nothing wrong with it, and so kids are using it, and so that would be my biggest concern.
Yeah, Dr. Stout, I'm just you're bringing up some data that. We've seen data that we're all familiar with the Youth First Behavior Survey. And so I'm just trying to understand a couple of the different points that you're bringing up about the high use, and also my understanding, and we've had significant pressure on us and the Cannabis Control Board to loosen our advertising laws. And we've been reluctant to do that because we don't want, we've taken great strides to keep this, and packaging standards to keep our cannabis market not, being marketed to minors. So I'm just wondering, maybe just in our Vermont-based context, I know you're speaking with the Colorado perspective, but if you're talking about Vermont-specific youth use data.
And if I may, real quick, as you're referencing studies and speakers, instead of saying like a study, a person, could you please actually share the information with us? I have no data to look at to see who compiled it, analyzed it, or funded the studies.
Please.
Right. Well, and actually, I know that you heard really good testimony yesterday from the Vermont medical society people.
That was
And they're
our
the ones,
committee.
so they're basically saying that Vermont has the highest rate, one of the highest rates, and that 41% of 18 to 25-year-olds have used cannabis in the past 30 days. That's in Vermont. That's, I think, highly significant. That's almost half of the kids of that age group. And so I think that that's very significant information. And yeah, I could give you the references for the PTSD studies I've given. I could send that in an email. I'd be happy to do that.
And maybe the YouTube speaker you were citing as well?
Pardon?
You cited a presentation on YouTube or online, if we could see that as well. Any of the points that you referenced in your testimony as applicable to this?
Okay.
As a part of your information gathering, I would love it if you could share that with us.
Okay. I actually have a brief little slideshow just on post-traumatic stress disorder, and that has the references in the slide, so I could send that to you.
That would be wonderful.
Okay.
Questions for Dr. Stout from the committee? Well, thank you for being with us today. I think we have a variety of perspectives about specifically this container size question that you bring up, and of course concerns about making sure that we're not marketing to minors. Are there other questions for Dr. Stout? Anything else we want to? Representative Higley.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for testifying today. Just curious, you say you're in Colorado. What are you seeing? Of course, you've been at it 10 years now. What are you seeing as the number of people that may be reaching out to you or others for help in that regard, usage of cannabis?
Well, I'd have to say that the biggest problem has been with cannabis-induced psychosis. We are seeing significant increases in that, and it is totally related to the increased amount of THC that people are using and the frequency of their use. So we have young people that are smoking dabs, the very high concentration stuff, or vaping stuff that's like 60%, 70%, that is really creating havoc with their mental health. And so I think that's the biggest thing that we have been seeing. And so that makes it the most concerning. And that's why we were successful in getting our bill passed back in 21, which limited the availability of medical marijuana for 18 to 20-year-olds. Back before that bill, we had 18 to 20-year-olds that could get 40 grams of concentrate daily, which is insane. Right now, they can get 2 grams of concentrate, but that's still an amazing amount of THC. Because if you look at the research for medicinal cannabis, like we have these drugs, like we have Marinol, we have, it's Dronabinol, Marinol, and the FDA, and that's pure THC. So it's 100% THC, but the recommendation is that people not take more than 10 milligrams twice a day. If you look at what an 18 to 20-year-old can get in Colorado, if they buy a bag of shatter, which is 80% THC, then there's 800 milligrams in that 1 gram bag. And then they can buy 2 of them. So that's 1,600 milligrams of THC that they can buy and use. And then they're thinking that it's medicine, and it is not medicine. I mean, that is not medicine. And so most of the people that are advocating the use of that, I believe, are doing the right thing in terms of using medicinal cannabis, are talking about using concentrations well below 10 milligrams and not using these huge amounts. And so if you have a package of 50 milligrams, then there's 5 doses in there. But if you expand that to 100, then there's 10 doses in there. And so that just expands the risk for these things.
Representative Byron.
So you keep referencing 18 to 21-year-olds in Colorado. What is the legal age to purchase cannabis products retail in Colorado?
Retail is 21.
Okay. So
But-
it sounds like
but-
if there's a consumption issue with that youth demographic, you have a compliance issue, not necessarily a product issue.
Yeah, except that their brains are still developing until they're 25. So, I mean, it's still a public health problem.
But you keep referencing an age range where they're actually not even legally allowed to. And we're speaking to a controlled environment, not an uncontrolled environment within this committee's conversation.
Okay, but this is also, I mean, they can do it if they've got a medical card. And it's very easy to get a medical card. I don't know how easy it is in Vermont.
We're one of the strictest states.
Yeah, we've limited our potency caps and also have a stricter regime, which so we're balancing the desire to have actually our medical program be more open. Against some of the concerns that you brought up, but Representative Higley, you had a question.
No, again, I'd just like to say, regardless of whether or not those limits are in this bill, H 270, I know the Senate has considered and is, I don't know if they've taken testimony or not, it's kind of dropped off the radar a little bit, but looking at increasing that THC cap from 60% further, basically talking about how there's still a concern that they're going to get it through the illicit market anyway. And of course, we want to have it be a good protected product. To even go further, and I've received information from Lamoille County Valley Health folks that were just in New York State. You can have all the regulations you want, but whether or not it's followed, whether it's in Colorado, New York, there's stipulations where they were just down in New York here, where it's on the streets. It was being sold to them on Times Square, solicited for sale on Times Square. These are all things that are against the law down there, and it's basically they're saying too that law enforcement isn't even going to attempt to enforce some of the regulations. And, they even talked here about talking with law enforcement in regards to a lot of the regulations and so on, and saying that the only thing that they're really able to enforce is underage use. So there is a concern, at least in my point and from what I've heard from other states. So, but again, I appreciate you even talking about the effects of increased dosages of THC.
Representative Nugent.
Is it fair to say, and this might not be the perfect question for you, so feel free to let me know, but that part of the issue, at least with the package size, is kind of like the Overton window. I don't know if you're familiar with that term, but like what becomes possible like along a spectrum. It's like if you have, I don't know, like drinking a gallon of water sounds extreme right now, but if someone had like a half gallon of water on their table every day, then that might make the gallon of water seem less extreme, but it still might have, in that case, actually might not be a great thing for you. Is that kind of like what you're saying about like package size? It's kind of like, it's a psychological thing in terms of like what's okay versus.
Exactly. I think that's a very good point. That's why I was kind of thrilled that you had the limit at 50, where we don't have that limit in Colorado, but now you're trying to expand it to what we have in Colorado. And yes, I think it does make people think, well, that and this is true for all addictive drugs. Everybody starts by thinking, well, if a little is good, a lot must be better. And so, especially when it's couched as medicine, people are going to say, well, then 100 must be fine. 50's good, but 100's better.
Well, Dr. Stout, thank you for being with us today. We're going to pick this conversation back up this afternoon. And I want to have a chance to confer with legislative council a little bit about some of the changes that I think we're going to ask to see when we return from the floor. Are there any kind of final questions for Dr. Stout from the committee?
Yeah.
Representative Morgan.
Dr. Stout, you just said addictive. How is this stuff in general? It's not my world. I don't know it at all, really. So I speak from a lot of level of not knowing, but is this an addictive thing that can get worse and worse and worse and snowball? I'm hearing that from you. And again, it's not my world, so I'm asking out of ignorance. I mean, because that's concerning to me as I'm hearing that from you, as we have enough problems with things in general in this country, in this world, that, you know, are we adding to it? I don't know. I'm just asking that as a general question.
Yes, this is turning out to be one of the most addictive drugs we have. My entire career, I have spent dealing with tobacco, and I try and convince programs to be tobacco free because nicotine is the most addictive drug we have. However, I am now seeing that these higher potency products are
Dr.
just.
Stout, can I just really, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but what's tricky for me about what I'm hearing from you say is you immediately went to talking about high potency products, and we have limits on the potency of our products here. And so when Representative Morgan asked you about, you know, is cannabis addictive? When you talk about high potency products, I think maybe you're conflating two kind of separate concerns. That's all. I just want to make sure the committee is clear about what you're testifying on.
Okay. No, the drug itself is addicting. Yes, very addicting.
That's what I'm asking.
And when people use more of it, then they tend to develop cannabis use disorder. So if they were just using a 10 milligram piece once in a while, they're not going to have an addiction problem. But if they're using it every day, all day long, 10 milligrams, so you have a 100 milligram package and they're using 10 doses every day, they are going to develop cannabis use disorder. Yes. And then that will create the problems that we're seeing with people using frequently, using regularly, these doses. This is, you know, and that's where you start getting into the psychotic symptoms, the cannabis hyperemesis syndrome symptoms, because they're using regularly. And then they think, and this has been well studied also in medical marijuana patients, that when they stop using, they have significant withdrawal. And that's how you know it's an addictive substance, because when you use it daily, regularly, and you stop, similar to any other addictive drug, you have withdrawal symptoms. And so many people equate that with, oh, it's my symptoms are coming back. They don't realize that it's really the withdrawal symptoms. So withdrawal to marijuana is irritability, anxiety, anger, massive cravings for cannabis, and problems sleeping, problems eating, because these are all things that the cannabis did for them. But then now they're in withdrawal. So that's why we're seeing more and more people with increased anxiety issues because of their marijuana use. Yes, it initially works. That's just like any other addictive drug. But then once you become dependent on it, and yes, there is a physiological dependence, it's not just psychological, then you're in withdrawal, and then you have to manage that withdrawal. And the normal way is to use again.
Representative Pango, did you have a question?
Yeah, I did. So you were talking about the difference between high potency and low potency, and I apologize for having to be out of the room. Is there a definition of high and low in terms of milligrams of THC?
Well, yes. I mean, there are more and more people trying to equate this. So the FDA came out, well, not the FDA, some people working with that came out with like a recommended dose would be 5 milligrams, like that's a single dose. Some places say maybe 10 milligrams. But then again, like I'm saying, if you use that just occasionally, like you're using ibuprofen for a headache and you just use it occasionally, that is not going to be a problem. But even with drugs like ibuprofen, if somebody uses it all day long every day and they quit, they start having rebound headaches just because of the drug use. And so your body becomes habituated to it. And so it can be, high potency is used to determine, how much is in the product, percentage wise. But there is still this milligram thing that you have to look at. And that's why I keep equating it back to Marinol or Dronabinol, which is the FDA says shouldn't be more than 20 milligrams a day, because when you get past 20 milligrams a day of pure THC, you start seeing the problems with the psychotic symptoms, the anxiety, the depression, those kind of things. So, the ideal dose, nobody really knows. But again, what I said was most people I know working with people with medical marijuana are using things like 1-to-1 balance of CBD to THC, and they may have like 5 milligrams of THC and an equivalent amount of CBD. And those people are not having problems like I'm talking about. It's when you get into using higher doses of it more regularly that you get into problems.
Thank you. So I just have one comment, and that is that it seems like, we're trying to, in this bill, raise the threshold, raise the amount of milligrams in a dose that's for sale.
No, that's not true.
Okay.
So I want to,
let me just finish, please. So I really need the healthcare committee to look at this dosage piece.
Human Services has traditionally looked at therapeutic use and did a drive-through yesterday. We might have talked about this when you were.
You said Human Services did, but I'm saying healthcare.
Well, so this is a public health piece around the container size. So that's absolutely true. I will just say we are not going to, I am not putting on the table for debate the jurisdictional appropriateness of our committees, which committee is going to take up which bills. This bill's in our lap. I've allowed the committee who's worked on that particular piece to do a drive-through, and they're offering us official feedback about that later today. So I'm really trying to be as expansive and allow the biggest variety of perspectives in this conversation. I really appreciate Dr. Stout coming on short notice and providing her testimony. Before we break, I just want to go back to a conversation that we had as a committee a couple weeks ago, which was that we have in this committee had this question about the amount of servings that could be in a single container. And right now, a person could buy multiple 50 milligram containers. And the practical thing, the only thing that we're changing here is to say you could buy 20 gummies that only have 5 milligrams of THC each. We're still keeping that cap. But you could buy 20 of them in a single container if we pass that section of this bill instead of just 10. And we looked at what the containers look like. It's a jar. The suggestion isn't that somebody sit down in one sitting and consume that entire jar, no more than it would be that you would drink an entire handle of vodka in one sitting, right? So that's the analogy here with other controlled substances is we allow Vermonters to purchase much more in one package of alcohol, for instance, than we would ever suggest would be safe or reasonable for a person to consume in one sitting. And this bill only says that somebody could buy a single package that contains more servings in it. That's the only change that we're making in H270 around the container. So I keep coming back to this because Dr. Stout and other folks in their testimony have brought up questions about potency. They've talked about things like dabs and shatter. We're not addressing any of that in H270. And I've been really trying to keep our discussion here as a committee focused on what's actually in the bill. So. Representative Nugent, and then we've got to break because a bunch of us have to get across the street. And we will come back to this discussion after.
Okay, I can.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
I don't want to. Great. So Dr. Seth, thanks for being with us. We are going to adjourn and go off live so we can all make it across the street. Appreciate everybody.